Good morning and welcome to this edition of Religion Zimbabwe Society's Research Day. And this panel, we are discussing youth, political change and economic development. My far right is Kuziwakwashe Zigomo, who's doing a PhD in religion at Royal Holloway University in London. In the Department of Politics and International Relations. Before she gets into her presentation, I'll just ask her to maybe give one or two lines about her research and what she's focusing on. Likewise, Christina Krikovskaya here at my immediate right, who's here at the University of Oxford and is a DPhil student in international development. So without further ado, we will get into the presentations. Our speakers will have at least 20 minutes to present their paper, after which we can take questions. As Colleen has already indicated, one of our presenters could not make it, unfortunately, because of a family bereavement. But fortunately for you guys, that gives you more time to get into your presentations and also interact with our audiences. So without further ado, over to you, Zero. Maybe this one or... Okay, all right.
Okay, hello everyone. Good morning to you. As mentioned, I'm Kuziwa, or Kuzi for short, and I work on religion and politics, or you could say politics and religion, as I'm based in the Department of Politics and International Relations at Royal Holloway University of London. Okay, so what I'm actually going to present to you today is part of my ongoing project in politics and religion in Zimbabwe. And it's based on fieldwork that I conducted last year from the period of June to September 2016 and December to January of 2018. The fieldwork is still ongoing and this is very, very much a work in progress. So I'm really looking forward to hearing a lot of your comments and a lot of your tips and advice, because I know there are a lot of Zimbabweans here who could give me a lot of great insights into this project. This particular one is working on leadership, religion and politics. I'm just going to pull up my presentation. And so, the fieldwork that I conducted, which I'm going to talk about a bit more in a few slides. Sorry, I'll just pull that up for you. Okay. Was my work in researching a social movement and a political group and a religious group. At this stage, I've done quite a bit of work researching a social movement. The reason why I was researching these three groups is because I was looking to trace the generational shifts that have been happening within civil society and activism, political activism in Zimbabwe, within politics and within mainstream politics and within religion. The religion I particularly focus on is Pentecostalism, as it is a growing religion amongst the young. And the urban Zimbabweans. It's got a young and urban population, and you'll probably find me mention a little bit of that in my work with the social movements, which is what the presentation today is based on. So I'm looking at conceptualizations of leadership and how leadership is evolving in Zimbabwe. As we've talked about before, this is an intergenerational, or intergenerationalism is the topic that we're looking at, and I'm looking particularly at perceptions of leadership in Zimbabwe. How our leaders are legitimated or how they legitimate themselves, how leadership is understood, the role of gender in leadership and how we understand it, as well as religion in leadership as well. To me, and as a student of religion and politics in Zimbabwe, we know that religion is or Zimbabwe rather, is a deeply religious society. And so I've pretty much encased a lot of this on the perceptions of leadership, how leaders are legitimated and the roles of gender within that religious framework of religious ideas and frameworks. So my research question, how are cultural religious beliefs and ideas framing understandings of political leadership and authority in Zimbabwe? As we know, Zimbabwe has been an authoritarian, or has had an authoritarian government for over 37 years now, and we've had a recent change in government. but also my interest is in how these religious beliefs and ideas are feeding into authoritarian leadership in Zimbabwe, and in what stages or in what ways they buttress and resist that type of authoritarianism. Now, my literature framework and my literature review and theoretical framework basically consists of two branches of literature. One which tells us the mainstream modernization theory, which I know you're probably all very much aware of, that as the generations progress and as modernity progresses, we should expect to see the young moving more and more away from religious and cultural beliefs and moving more to a secular type of system. We should expect to see politics becoming more secular. And we should expect to see this erosion of traditional values, value systems, as we all become democracies. Another branch of literature that has been of interest to me has been on retraditionalism and the cultural relativism as well, where I've drawn authors like Chaval and Deleuze and Skatsberg, and who come sort of with the very basic point that religion and culture matters in the way that people understand politics, in the way that they understand political leadership, in the way that they relate to their leaders, in the way that they conceptualize and understand. And this is clearly where I'm situated. I don't want to go much into the religious aspect or religion in Zimbabwe, because as we know, there are so many religions that we could talk about. But just so you know where I'm situated within my study, I'm situated in the area of Pentecostalism and the indigenous churches, mainly because they reflect a lot of the local culture. They've managed to enculturate themselves into the society. And also because Pentecostalism has been thriving and growing. They've got really large followings combined with the indigenous churches. And so, back to religion and autocracy. And I want to bring in, I guess, Kobi Baba, who I think some of you may be aware of, a post-colonial theorist with his influential ideas of cultural identity. His very hybrid and adaptive approach of how resistance and hegemony takes place, but Baba writes to a very colonial context, and I've kind of decontextualized Baba. And to pretty much put it in short, I'm sort of using him to trace leadership and how leadership works, how hegemonic orders are established, and how they are also resisted from within. So my field work actually is an ethnographic study, as I mentioned before, looking at a social group, a political movement, and a religious movement, a religious group. I've done 40 in-depth interviews to date and about 8 focus groups. And my work today, as I said earlier, will be based on a social movement called #Tajamuka. And this one actually emerged alongside this flag, Africa Unity Square, She Votes, and quite a few of them that emerged within the period of June to August 2016. And the period in which I actually joined the movement and researched the movement from within, my agenda to find out how leadership was working within the movement and how it was being understood and perceived, how the roles of leadership were being understood internally within the movement, and also externally from those who were maybe onlookers. I joined the movement at the point at which it was losing momentum. So a lot of these social movements had a lot of momentum from the June to August 2016 period, and had begun to sort of lose momentum after that period, particularly when a lot of the leaders of that movement and these various movements had been arrested, and there was a lot of fear within the environment, and this is the context I came in. I worked with the movement in finding ways of which they would be able to sort of restart up that momentum again. And this was pretty much the ethnographic context that I got to work with the movement within as a member of the social movement. Now, these movements actually, a lot of the actors within these movements, a lot of the social movements, I think those who've been following them have moved on into mainstream politics, which is pretty much now the context within which I come to you today, that these youth-based social movements, a lot of the leaders and the activists that were leading these movements were not only political actors as well as religious actors, I learned, but they were also branching, many of which, into mainstream politics. One of the interviewees I had the privilege to interview was Fazai Mayere, who's running a campaign in Harare. And she's running the Be the Change Yellow campaign. She's one of the first female pioneers of young female activists who launched into mainstream politics and announced her candidature alongside Wimbai Mshaburi and Linda Basaride as well. And I got to interview all three of them as they had now begun to move on into politics. And I've included a quote here about what Fazai Mayere had to say in terms of how she branched out of this flag and into mainstream politics. But I won't sort of bore you with reading the whole thing out. But the main thing to note about what Fazai Mayere says here is how the social movement itself gave them. So she's saying that a lot of people think that this flag died, but it didn't die. And basically what happened was it gave them a stepping stone, especially the young politicians or aspiring politicians, to get into politics. Fazai would be what we would classify as a middle class young lady who at first had not been involved in politics. And politics was sort of viewed as something for a different class of people, a different type of people, the elites, maybe the older generation, who were often more heard. And so for her, it created space. This flag was a forum which created space for people like her to fit into the politics of the nation. And as she says here, it shouldn't be the preserve of any elite group. It doesn't matter whether they're in the grassroots, whether they've been in the struggle for 20 years, whether they're old, or whether they're a particular tribe or color, but it should be the preserve of an elite group of people. And so Fazai Mayere is right, because the political space has opened up. We see that the absence of the two big men who were very much there when I went in September 2017 are no longer there. The two father figures of the nation are no longer there, and it's their political sons who are now going to be running in an election this coming month. We have a younger electorate as well and a wider political playing field, more and more independent candidates, as well as female candidates as well, young female candidates. I think Fazai, Wimbai, and Linda probably pioneered that, but we've seen more and more young female candidates stepping out. And I think I want to spend the rest of my presentation today presenting to you my conceptual framework in terms of the way that we're thinking about politics. I want to do this in pretty much two ways. Presenting it to you as both challenges and maybe potential opportunities that this new generation that is branched into politics would have to begin to overcome. This conceptual framework, which I've called as the Pentecostalization matrix, I won't get into why I chose to call it that at the moment, only that probably because a lot of the features that I've put within this framework are things that also I identified that are happening within the Pentecostal churches. But today I want to speak about it from a purely political perspective, relating to activism and also mainstream politics, of which the next phase of my research goes into where I follow these activists into mainstream politics. And so basically what I want us to think about is how leadership is evolving in Zimbabwe, like where I started. And this matrix is something I want to put to you today as a suggestion of how it's evolving, and I'm pretty sure you'll give me feedback on that. The first thing that I did pick up in my work with the social movements and in looking at mainstream politics and the way that things have changed is this personification that we have of these movements, whether it's the civic movements or the political movements, which tend to be one and the same when I was researching them and working with them. The personification comes in the way that one individual becomes almost the face of the struggle or the face of the movement. We see that a lot in politics, in mainstream politics, and I always think of when I attended a rally in Zimbabwe, the coalition launch, and there were the faces of the leaders on the regalia that a lot of the supporters were wearing. But one of the things that I do think about is how these leaders are elevated to almost a demigod type of status. As one of my interviewees said in an interview, we're looking for a Moses to take us into the promised land. And I use this language intentionally. That it's always a savior. I think at first there was Changilai, there was Mugabe, and now there's Ivan Mawarire, and there's, whether it's Promise or whoever it is, the next leader. And this personification was one thing that came a lot into the movements as they were evolving, and how to overcome this personification that many of the movements themselves and supporters in the movements and observers of the movements identified as a weakness within the actual movements themselves. The next thing is monarchy. Monarchy, I guess, would be the next stage that this leadership moves into. We wouldn't see this so much within the social movements because they haven't matured into political parties. I say this because social movements in Zimbabwe are fairly new, and within civil society, activism has tended to launch into politics. But monarchy is what then happens when they solidify into political parties and a leader becomes a father figure. And I use him, or the father figure, because of the patriarchy within the society that we operate in. Where the men who are leading are seen as father figures and sacrificial lambs as well, and martyrs. A lot of the supporters that I interviewed would talk about how their leaders suffered for them and went to jail and did jail time for them, and spoke about it with a lot of admiration that our leaders are suffering for us. And whatever it is about suffering that people wanted to see in their leaders made me think of a lot of the men who went to war in the liberation struggle to suffer for us. Changirai, who suffered for the democratic revolution in Zimbabwe, and the images of the bruises, of the bruised face after he came out of jail. Ivan Mawarire, I guess, would be, if I'm to link this to the social movements again, we saw his trial case at Rotten Row and how a lot of his support seemed to dissipate when he left the country and looked like he was going into a place of comfort and refuge and not suffering the way that he wanted to. And it begins to make you think, what is it about sacrificial lambs? Is there something of a religious element to it, where Christ suffered for us and died for us, that we could have life? Do we think of our liberation heroes when we think about it? Where does this come into the leaders who suffer and who do jail time and who are our protectors as well? There's also the disciplinarian focus as well, the leader who disciplines. Skatsberg talks a lot about the father figure who disciplines his children, and he talks about how African leaders relate paternity to their citizens like fathers towards their children, that the father has to discipline and chastise. Consequently enough, actually, women tend to discipline and chastise. And I think, I know the images of Grace Mugabe and the rallies and the chastising and the emasculation of Mugabe is what I think of. And that's something that you can't help but think of. But moving on to women as well, and the way that women are conceptualized in leadership and politics, the way that their legitimation comes through the men, the way that their positions come through the men. I think the most dominant example we have is Grace, but I remember even when I was collecting data and speaking to different female activists, particularly I think with Fazima Here's campaign, and the way that women tend to take the fall a lot in politics. They tend to be the scapegoats in politics. How can we overcome that thinking? How can we move past that politics where somehow the men are forgiven and quite more easily, but the women not so easily. We saw the demonization of Kupe most recently within the MDC, and we keep seeing that sort of trend towards that. Moving on from there, commercialization. I remember collecting data and talking to different people who felt that a lot of the activism in Zimbabwe had become somewhat of a business. It had become somewhat of a leasing out of the struggle and a prolonging of the struggle to begin to sort of get donor money or donor aid, and how it had lost the original cause that it had. And how this mirrored the way that politics also had become a family business at the time. This was obviously in the context of 2017, before we had the change of regime. And I think we all saw the word commercialization that kept on coming up, and how all of this activism business, much like the church, the Pentecostal churches, they would say, had become almost like businesses, money-making, profit-making businesses. But another thing as well was the politics of patronage, and how that continues to come into the way that politics is conducted. Which leader can give me protection? Which leader can help me to survive, can help me to be able to get past the poverty? In my work with the social movements at the time, there was a lot of suspicion in the environment, fear of infiltration, a lot of fear to speak out because one of our own would sell us out, and a lot of lining to different political parties based on who can give me protection, who can give me, who can help me to survive in this climate. Dr. Shilima, who I did an interview with, and he's in activism and the president of the Evangelical Fellowship of Zimbabwe, mentioned in a comment to me how patronage thrives in societies where there's poverty, where there's patriarchy as well. And just the same way that we can find a prophet to give us a bangle that will tell us or ward off evil spirits or help us to find food or help us to make money or help us to be able to survive, whether it's spiritually or materially. We look for that as well in our leaders. The final feature of that is prophecy. I've used a very interesting name for that, but I want us to think about the rhetoric that, or rather a lot of the religious rhetoric that comes in politics and the way that we talk about it. Why is it that our leaders have to go to religious conventions and we see them almost being told that they will be the next man of God who will lead the nation? We saw that happen with Mohadi, I think it was, before his appointment into office. Is there something that kind of stays with the public when they see him appointed in a prophetic service, whether it's by Prophet Bushiri or whoever it is, and they're told that this will be the next great leader? Have we moved away from that type of thing as well? I know Nelson Chamisa does a lot of public messaging where we see him praying for people and we see him on mountaintops, and we know that he's a man of God, and we've heard the prophecies of the next man of God beginning to come and to lead. But we also hear the rhetoric and the utterances, because within the word prophecy is the utterances that come out from people's mouths. And the utterances in terms of a lot of the religious rhetoric, we know that the tagline for Chamisa's campaign is God is in it. We know as well, we've heard the voice of the people is the voice of God. But we've also seen an element of divine rulership that comes in there. It's my divine right to rule. And what kind of a hegemonic order could that be establishing? Where we cannot begin to oppose you because it is God's right that I'm here to rule. Is that the way maybe part of our politics is working? And how can young people begin to change that narrative? I think to conclude here, I pretty much just put this out there, and I'd be very much interested to hear a lot of your views on that. Particularly as I'm going into the final phase of the field work, where I'll be working now within the mainstream political parties over the election period, and I think this will be a great time to test the actual matrix in action. But maybe some of the questions we could ask is whether religion is part of the solution or the problem in Zimbabwe, and whether or not this is a new age of politics that we are seeing, or it's just simply, again, the old in the new. So I think I'll leave it there, and thank you very much.
Thanks, Kuziwa.